It is my pleasure this morning to get to introduce Dr. Stacy Smallwood. Dr. Smallwood is an associate professor of community health at the Jinping Shu College of Public Health, an affiliate faculty in the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program at Georgia Southern University. His research focuses on promoting equity in health and well-being among marginalized communities. He believes that scholarship and activism should work together to promote empowerment. He's the immediate past chair of the HIV/AIDS section for the American Public Health Association, and he serves as the moderator for our own Bullitt County's Beloved Community, a grassroots organization with the purpose of building connections across lines of social differences in Statesboro and other surrounding areas. We are very excited to have you with us this morning, Stacy, and I am eager to hear your talk this morning.
Thank you, Teresa, and thanks to all of you for granting me this opportunity to share with you this morning. I'm very excited to have a chance to be in fellowship with you around a topic that may seem heavy or difficult, but it's one that is also changeable. So I am going to be mindful of time. I am both a professor and a preacher, and when you combine those two things, people can go on for a little while, but I'm going to try to be as clear and to the point as possible as we take up the topic today of weathering as an examination of the strengths and the susceptibilities of Black bodies. Since I was a child, I've been fascinated with the weather. It's been a part of my life and the landscape in which I grew up. When the town where I grew up first got cable, the channel that I watched the most was the Weather Channel, because I was fascinated with this idea that what was happening in the sky where I lived may not be also happening everywhere, and how that could be. And also, I grew up in northeastern North Carolina, which is no stranger to hurricanes. Whenever my grandparents would take me shopping with them, I would make sure to pick up the latest hurricane tracking maps. And so anytime a storm had been named, I'd watch the evening news to get the latest coordinates, and I'd plot them on the map, trying to see the paths of the storms that were coming and going. And in our case, more often than not, they were coming. But I also remember dreaming about the possibility that I could manipulate the weather. I grew up reading comic books, what seemed to be the only outlet for a geeky kid like me who didn't have many friends at school or in my neighborhood. Comic books became my gateway to companionship. I imagined not only that some of my favorite characters were around me, fighting in these invisible adventures, but I also imagined what it might be like to have some of their powers. So it's only natural that I gravitated to the character Storm of the X-Men. Originally named Aurora Monroe, Storm was born in Kenya and orphaned at an early age. She became a pickpocket on the streets of Nairobi to survive until her mutant power manifested and she discovered she could control the weather. She then became regaled and worshipped as a goddess, the Wind Rider. Tornadoes, lightning, torrential rain, fog, the atmosphere was her sandbox. She could play with it, wrap it around her fingers and make it bend to her will. I wanted so badly to be Storm. I remember one summer when a cousin of mine from Indiana came to visit and we went outside to play. And it was a cloudy day, disturbed, a meteorological vine ripe for blooming thunderstorms. And we ran outside and around the playground, and I held my hands up the way I'd seen Storm do it in the comics, pretending that every gust of wind that kicked up around us was because of the lightning in my brain and the sweep of my hands, as if I were conducting a symphony of air. I felt strong, powerful, just the way I'd imagined Storm must have felt when she rode the winds and made the elements heed her call. What I never thought about, though, was the toll that that strength must take on her body, her mind. I never thought about how her strength in the face of all adversity might be hurting her in the long run. And this is where weathering comes in. As much as I fantasized about the ability to control the weather, I never considered the impact that the weather had on the environment around me. Not until I was in a physical science class did it register to me that the whims of the wind took a toll on bodies. We admire the mountain's ability to stand tall in the face of the elements, how front after front, squall after squall, they continue to rise to the top of our horizon. Majestic. Winter at its peak, summer in the valleys, they withstand and sustain everything at once. And we see that resilience at a distance and we applaud. But if we looked closer, past the forest, we'd see the vulnerability of the trees, the erosion of rock, the withering of roots from acid rain. Every minute, the 1,000 tiny cuts that we can't tell from a distance, but threaten to kill the mountain. Yet we don't always recognize the pain that the mountain endures. We just marvel at its ability to continue standing. So imagine then what it must be like to be a Black mountain standing in the face of a racist environment. We find ourselves right now in the midst of the latest in a history of anti-racist movements and uprisings in this country. We see the videos of Black people being abused and killed with such regularity now. Whether it's at the hands of law enforcement or other extrajudicial forces, our media have brought us the names of the lives that now become hashtags. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks. And I also want to lift up and center the names of some that you may not have heard of. Tony McDade, Nina Pop, just this year. And we've seen multiracial coalitions take to the streets across this country, even the globe, to protest against racial and state-sanctioned violence. And it's encouraging to see this. I'm glad to know that it's not just Black people out here organizing and mobilizing for Black lives. But for Black folks, there is a cost that comes along, not just with our current moment, but from just existing in this society that we need to address. I want you to think of racism not as some shocking, rare event. I want you to think about it as a part of everyday life. Think about what it must be like to have to examine almost every interaction you have with society through a racialized lens. As early as grade school, being a Black child who may act out for any number of reasons, but the reaction and punishment you receive is far different from what you see given to your non-Black counterparts. Or going to a predominantly white college or university and having your admission questioned as just an affirmative action quota. Or living in public housing and having every decision, every purchase, every move you make surveilled and policed because of your racial identity. The othering that takes place, that there's an asterisk next to your Americanness, as though somehow you are undeserving of the liberties, the benefits, the protections afforded to so many others. And yet you still feel the need to excel, to overcome your circumstances, to prove your societal naysayers wrong, that no matter what odds are stacked in your way, you're still gonna make it anyhow. Whether that defiance comes from your faith in a higher power or a desire not to fall into the popular narrative, you work so hard to not be a statistic. In the 1906 book, The Souls of Black Folk, W.E.B. Du Bois asked the question, how does it feel to be a problem? And I've heard noted scholar Melissa Harris Perry clarify this point so many times with the understanding that everyone has problems. But what does it mean for your very existence in a Black body to be a problem? What impacts do we experience because of that problem status? And what happens when we spend so much time and effort trying to prove our worth to the majority culture and dispel the stereotypes that get deployed against us? When I talk to my public health students about stress and coping, I talk to them about the concept of John Henryism. This is based on the folk tale of John Henry, a steel-driving Black man who worked on the railroads in West Virginia. And one day his prowess was put to the test against a steam-powered machine. And he raced against the machine, neck and neck, trying to nail down the railroad until he pushed through at the very end to finally beat the machine. But then he died of a heart attack as a result of the stress. John Henryism has been used as an allegory to describe the ways in which Black people have to spend so much of our physical, mental, and emotional energy responding to racial discrimination through this highly active coping, which literally burns us out. The idea that no matter what the odds are, we have to prevail against them. We have to do everything, even if it's on our own. And this is where the weathering hypothesis comes in. Weathering is a term that was coined by a public health researcher named Arlene Geronimus to describe how prolonged exposure to discrimination affects the body. It's tied to chronic stress. Literally, the stress of racism changes our DNA. NPR, a couple of years ago, had a Code Switch podcast that was literally called "This Racism is Killing Me Inside," in which it tells the story of Shalon Irving, who was a public health researcher and a Black woman who worked at the Centers for Disease Control, and the stress that she experienced throughout her life. But then finally, when she was able to give birth, she had a whole lot of health complications, but the doctors didn't believe her in what she was saying. They just said, "Oh, it'll pass, this will be fine." But literally the combination of the accumulation of that stress throughout her lifetime caused her to have such a hypertensive episode that she ended up dying and leaving her mother to take care of her infant child. And so I want you to think about the fight or flight response. You know, if you see a bear in the woods, your body activates. It releases stress hormones into your bloodstream. More energy goes into your muscles. It gets diverted from some of your other bodily systems so that you can either fight the threat or run away from it. And then once the threat is gone, your body can go back to normal. But what happens when the bear never leaves? When the stressor is constantly around you? When the things that you're resisting never disappear? It exhausts you. You get so busy fighting the bear every day that you never have a chance to recharge. And this helps to explain why the chromosomes of middle-aged Black women often lead them to have a physical age that is 7 to 8 years older than their white counterparts. The same drive that pushes us to be strong and weather the storm is the same thing that erodes us at the cellular level. This is part of why we see such disparities in maternal mortality. We see disparities in chronic disease. The stress of existing at its core is weathering us and wearing us out and picking at us bit by bit, chunk by chunk. There was an interview that was done with one of the daughters of Eric Garner. Shortly after Erica Garner, his daughter, died after she had done so much work trying to advocate and engage in activism as a result of her father's death. And she described it, Emerald Snipes Garner described it as a game of Jenga, that literally every day she saw a piece of her sister being taken out. Every day that she was out there fighting on the front lines and trying to make sure that what happened to her father never happened to anyone else, it literally was wearing at her body. And so I think that's a really powerful way for us to think about the concept of weathering. And I would also invite us to even think about the moment in which we currently find ourselves. We are now into our 4th month of social distancing and isolation because of COVID-19. a virus that has been deemed to be an equal opportunity danger. But what we see when we look at the numbers is that Black and brown people bear the disproportionate burden of coronavirus. And even in the midst of this, as we see a whole new crop of videos exposing violence against Black bodies, and we find ourselves organizing and mobilizing to declare once again that Black lives matter in all aspects, that we all deserve and are worthy of love and justice and citizenship. But think about the stress that we carry in our bodies as a result of that every day. The stress of being considered essential when that word sometimes may actually mean expendable. Think about the wear and the tear that that puts on us, a labor that we can't take off or escape. Even as we're fighting for our literal lives, that fight to be heard, to be seen, to be recognized, to be valued is exacting a price on our health. This is where all of us come in. We all have a part to play in this journey toward justice and equity. It's not enough for us to just be aware. We all have to stand on our front lines in so many ways. We have to do our homework and learn how we can challenge our biases. We have to call out those in our circles who say harmful things. We have to contact our elected officials at all levels to let them know how we feel about the issues of the day and advocate for legislation that will protect us all. When we center the experiences of the most marginalized and discriminated, we open the doors of access and justice for all of us to be free. As a child, I used to dream of being Storm. I used to idolize the idea of having the power of the elements at my fingertips. And now, after 41 years of life, I recognize that weather is not mine to control, but collectively, we can change the climate. I need you to see how racism is killing us, not just through extrajudicial violence, but through the experiences that we have every day. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And now that you see it, I need you to realize that you can never be who and what you want to be until we all have that liberty. The winds are changing, but for this change to sustain, all of us need to put our hands in the atmosphere.